Jake Foster stood at the edge of the metal wasteland, squinting against the orange sun that hung low on the horizon. The Krovar graveyard stretched out before him like a nightmare made of steel and rust. Broken war machines, some as tall as skyscrapers, jutted up from the ground at crazy angles. This was where alien civilizations came to die, or at least where their machines did. He kicked a chunk of metal plating and watched it skitter across the dirt. 2 years. He'd been working this graveyard for 2 years and it still gave him the creeps. Something about all this dead technology just sitting here in silence made his skin crawl. But the pay was good. Really good. A single functioning power core could set him up for months. His combat robot, Hammer 9, clanked up beside him. The machine stood about 8 feet tall, built like a tank with legs. Jake had bought him cheap from a military surplus auction, fixed him up, and they'd been partners ever since. Some guys talk to their dogs. Jake talked to his robot. Ready for another fun day of not dying? Jake asked, adjusting his helmet. Hammer's optical sensors whirred as they focused on the graveyard ahead. I calculate our survival probability at 92.6%, assuming standard hazards. You're a real ray of sunshine, you know that? They started walking into the graveyard, following the paths Jake had mapped over months of careful exploration. You didn't just wander randomly out here. Some of these dead machines still had active defense systems. Last month, a salvager named Tommy got too close to a Vex destroyer and got fried by an automated plasma turret. They never found enough of him to send home. The graveyard was quiet today. Just the wind whistling through broken hull plating and the crunch of their footsteps on the alien soil. Jake liked the quiet days. It meant nothing was trying to kill him. They worked their way toward a cluster of smaller machines, the kind Jake called the Beetles because of their rounded shells and multiple legs. He'd stripped 3 of them last week and found decent salvage. Maybe their cousins would be just as generous. Hammer stopped suddenly. His head swiveled left, then right, sensors going crazy. What's up? Jake asked, hand automatically moving to the plasma cutter on his belt. I'm detecting something unusual, Hammer said. His voice had that flat quality it always got when he was processing something important. Power signature. Active power signature. Jake felt his stomach drop. Where? Sector 7. Deep Sector 7. You're kidding me? Jake pulled up his wrist display, checking the map. Sector 7 was the danger zone, the place where the really massive machines had died. The kind of machines that fought in wars humanity couldn't even imagine. Nobody went to Sector 7 unless they had a death wish or were really, really desperate. I am incapable of humor, Jake. The signature is real. It's pulsing at regular intervals. Pulsing? Like it's still running? Affirmative. 0.7-second intervals. Very consistent. Jake stood there weighing his options. Everything in this graveyard was supposed to be dead. That was the whole point. These were the leftovers from wars that ended before humans even invented the wheel. Nothing out here had power anymore. Nothing except what salvagers brought with them. But if something was still running after all this time, could be a trap, Jake said, thinking out loud. Some kind of automated defense system waiting for idiots like us. Possible, Hammer agreed. But the signature doesn't match any known weapon system in my database. It's different. Different. Jake hated that word. Different usually meant dangerous. But it also meant valuable. Really valuable. The kind of find that could let him retire early, by that little place on New Terra he'd been dreaming about. Your sensors working okay? No glitches. 97% certain the reading is accurate. Jake looked toward Sector 7. He couldn't see it from here, but he knew what was out there. Machines the size of mountains. Weapons that could crack planets. All dead and cold and waiting in the dark. Except maybe they weren't all dead. All right, Jake said finally. Let's go check it out. But we move slow and careful. First sign of trouble we bolt. Understood. Understood. They changed course, heading deeper into the graveyard. The machines around them grew larger as they walked. Jake had to tilt his head back just to see the tops of some of them. Twisted metal limbs reached toward the sky like the fingers of buried giants. Hull plating the size of football fields lay scattered across the ground. Hammer's weapons systems activated twice during the first hour. Once when they passed too close to a Thorian battle tank and its proximity sensors woke up. Hammer put 3 rounds through its sensor array before it could fire. The second time, something moved in the shadows between 2 wrecks. Neither of them saw what it was, but Hammer's thermal scanner said it was gone now. They made camp that first night in the shelter of a crashed cruiser. Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about that power signature, pulsing away in the dark like a heartbeat. What could still be running after all these centuries? And more importantly, why? On the second day they found it. The ship sat in a small valley between three massive war machines, almost hidden from view. It was huge, easily the size of a city block, but somehow Jake had the feeling it was small compared to what it used to be. The design was completely different from anything he'd seen before. Smooth curves instead of hard angles. Flowing lines that almost looked organic, like someone had grown the ship instead of building it. And from somewhere deep inside its hull, a pale blue light pulsed. On and off. On and off. Regular as a heartbeat. Hammer, Jake whispered. Please tell me you're seeing this too. Confirmed. Jake, this ship, the design doesn't match anything in known databases. And according to my analysis, it's older than everything else in this graveyard. How much older? Centuries. Maybe millennia. Jake approached slowly, almost afraid the ship would disappear if he moved too fast. The hull was pristine. No blast marks. No hull breaches. No signs of battle damage at all. This ship hadn't been shot down. It had landed here. Deliberately. What's making that light? Jake asked. Hammer moved closer, sensors working overtime. It's coming from the core systems. And Jake, it's not just a light. It's a signal. A message. Broadcasting on repeat. Can you tell what it says? Not yet. The language is completely unknown. But I'm detecting patterns. Give me time to analyze it. Jake walked around the ship's exterior, running his gloved hand along the strange metal. It was cool to the touch, even in the afternoon heat. He found sealed hatches, viewing ports still intact, and what looked like docking ports along the upper hull. Hammer, this ship is in perfect condition. Why would someone leave it here? Unknown. But Jake, I've completed preliminary analysis of the signal. It's not a distress call. Then what is it? Hammer turned his optical sensors toward Jake, and even though the robot didn't have a face, Jake could swear he looked worried. It's a warning. Jake stared at the pulsing blue light, his mind racing. A warning. Not a call for help, not a beacon for rescue. A warning that had been broadcasting for who knows how long, out here in the middle of nowhere, waiting for someone to listen. A warning about what? Jake asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Hammer's processors hummed as he worked on the translation. I need more time to decode it fully. The language structure is unlike anything in my database. It's not just different, Jake. It's old. Really old. Jake pulled out his portable scanner and started documenting the ship. He took readings of the hull composition, photographed every angle, and mapped the exterior as best he could. Whatever this thing was, he wanted records. If something happened to them out here, at least someone would know what they'd found. The ship was beautiful in a way that made Jake uncomfortable. Human ships were boxy and practical. Even the fanciest alien designs he'd seen had hard edges, obvious weapon systems, clear purposes. But this thing looked like art. Like someone had spent years making sure every curve was perfect, every line flowed into the next. It didn't look like a machine. It looked alive. Hammer, any idea what powered this thing? Scanning now. The robot moved around the ship's perimeter, sensors working overtime. The power source is located deep in the central core. It's not fusion, not antimatter, not any conventional system I recognize. Whatever it is, it's still generating power after all this time. That shouldn't be possible. Yeah, well, this whole situation shouldn't be possible. Jake found what looked like a main hatch. It was sealed tight, but there were markings around the frame. Symbols in that same unknown language. He traced them with his finger, wondering what they meant. Instructions? Warnings? The alien equivalent of keep out? They set up camp next to the ship that night. Jake couldn't sleep again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was curiosity. He kept staring at that pulsing light, thinking about the beings who built this ship. Where were they now? What had they been running from? And why hide here in a graveyard of dead machines? Hammer worked through the night, never stopping, never resting. That was one advantage of having a robot partner. No sleep needed. By the time the orange sun started climbing back up the sky, Hammer had made progress. Jake, I've cracked about 30% of the language structure. It's based on mathematical patterns which make sense for a distress signal. Universal concepts. Jake sat up, rubbing his eyes. What's it say? They are coming. Hammer paused. That's the first part. They're coming. They consume all. A chill ran down Jake's spine despite the warming air. Keep going. We fled but could not escape. Preserve the knowledge. Remember us. Warn others. They are, and then it cuts off and repeats from the beginning. Jake stood up slowly, looking at the ship with new eyes. Someone was running. Running so hard they ended up here, in the middle of the biggest machine graveyard in known space. And they didn't make it, Hammer added quietly. The message has been playing on loop for an estimated 800 to 1,000 years. What could scare something advanced enough to build this? Jake walked closer to the ship, pressing his palm against the hull. It was still cool even after sitting in the sun all morning. They had technology we can't even understand. What were they running from? Hammer didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew that whatever it was bad enough to make an advanced civilization give up and hide. Over the next 3 days, Jake and Hammer worked on getting inside the ship. Jake wasn't a hacker, but he was good with machines. He'd spent his whole life taking things apart and putting them back together. Alien or not, a door was still a door. It had to open somehow. The breakthrough came on the 4th day. Jake found a maintenance panel near the base of the ship, hidden under a layer of dust and time. Inside was something that looked almost like a circuit board, but the connections were all wrong. He hooked up his portable power supply, more out of desperation than any real plan. The hatch hissed. Ancient seals broke. Air that had been trapped for centuries escaped with a sound like a dying breath. Jake, wait, Hammer said. We should scan for contaminants, pathogens, anything dangerous. But Jake was already climbing through the hatch, his flashlight cutting through the darkness inside. Life's too short to be careful all the time, Hammer. Come on. The interior took Jake's breath away. Where the outside was smooth and perfect, the inside was even more incredible. The walls glowed softly with bioluminescent patterns, lighting up as they walked, like the ship knew they were there. The corridors were wide and tall, designed for beings much larger than humans. Everything had that same flowing, organic quality. They found the first chamber after about 50 feet. It was massive, the size of a warehouse, and filled with thousands of crystalline structures. They grew from the floor, the walls, even the ceiling. Each one pulsed with a faint internal light. Hammer, what am I looking at? The robot scanned the crystals carefully. Data storage. Incredible. Each crystal contains more information than every computer on Earth combined. And there are thousands of them. Jake walked between the crystals, his reflection bouncing off their surfaces. This isn't just a ship. It's an archive. They were trying to preserve something. Everything, Hammer corrected. They were trying to preserve everything. Their history, their science, their culture. This is the complete record of an entire civilization, Jake. They spent hours exploring. They found more chambers filled with equipment Jake couldn't begin to understand. They found rooms that might have been living quarters, though the furniture was strange and the proportions all wrong. They found what looked like a garden, though everything in it had died long ago, leaving only dried husks in perfectly arranged rows. And then they found the control room. It was at the heart of the ship, a circular chamber with walls covered in those glowing symbols. In the center was a pedestal with a single crystal, larger than the others, pulsing with that same blue light they'd seen from outside. That's it, Jake said. That's the source of the signal. Hammer approached the pedestal carefully. Jake, this crystal contains the ship's complete logs. Everything that happened, everyone who was here and what they were running from. I can interface with it, download the information. Do it. Hammer extended a data cable and connected to the crystal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the entire room lit up with holographic displays. Images filled the air around them. Cities, forests, oceans. An entire world, beautiful and thriving. And then the images changed. The cities burning. The forests dying. The oceans turning black. Something was consuming the world, breaking it down piece by piece, and the beings who lived there could only run. Jake watched in horror as the story played out. A civilization of artists and scientists, peaceful and curious, suddenly facing something they couldn't fight or understand. They built ships and fled, scattering across the galaxy, hoping to find safety. This ship carried researchers and their families. They ran for months, maybe years, but the thing chasing them never stopped. So they came here to the graveyard, hoping the interference from so many dead machines would hide them. They were wrong. The last image showed the crew, gathered in this very room, recording their final message. Then darkness. The ship had been alone ever since, broadcasting its warning into the void. Hammer, Jake said quietly, what were they running from? The robot's voice was grim. They called it the swarm. And Jake, there's something else you need to know. What? According to these logs, the swarm doesn't die. It just goes dormant, hiding in dead technology, waiting for something to wake it up. Jake felt his blood turn to ice. Hammer, we're standing in the middle of the biggest collection of dead technology in the galaxy. I know. If the swarm was chasing this ship, then it's here. Somewhere in this graveyard. And Jake, my sensors are picking up movement. All around us. The machines outside are starting to wake up. Jake's hands were shaking as he pulled up his wrist display. The motion sensors were going crazy. All around the ship, throughout the graveyard, things were moving. Things that had been dead for centuries were suddenly coming back to life. How long do we have? Jake asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Hammer's processors worked frantically. Difficult to calculate. The movement is slow right now, exploratory. Whatever is out there is waking up gradually. I estimate we have maybe 12 hours before it reaches full activity. Then we need to leave. Right now. Jake turned toward the exit, but Hammer's metallic hand caught his arm. Jake, wait. Look at this. The holographic displays were still active, showing more information from the ship's logs. Hammer had found something else in the data, something the original crew had left behind. Not just a warning but research. Years of desperate study trying to understand their enemy, trying to find a way to fight it. They didn't just run, Hammer explained. They tried to learn. They documented everything about the swarm. How it operates, how it spreads, what it's vulnerable to. Jake looked at the thousands of crystals around them. This is all that information? Not just information. Weapons research. Defense strategies. Everything they learned before the end. Jake, this could save humanity. If the swarm is still out there, still active, then every civilization in the galaxy needs this data. Fat lot of good it'll do them if we're dead. Jake paced back and forth thinking. His survival instincts screamed at him to run, to get back to his shuttle and get off this planet as fast as possible. But another part of him, the part that had always been curious, that had always wanted to know what was over the next hill, that part was pulling him toward those crystals. How long to download all of this? Jake asked. Everything? At least 15 hours. Maybe longer. The data structure is complex and I need to translate as I copy. We don't have 15 hours. I know. Hammer looked at him with those optical sensors. But we could take some of it. The most important files. The ones about the swarm and how to fight it. That would only take about 3 hours. Jake walked to the edge of the chamber and looked out into the corridor. The ship's lights were still glowing softly, peaceful and calm. It was hard to believe that outside, an ancient nightmare was waking up. He thought about Tommy, the salvager who got killed last month. Tommy had a wife back on New Terra. 2 kids. They'd never even recovered his body. That could be Jake in a few hours. Dead in some alien graveyard, nobody even knowing what happened to him. But he also thought about Earth. About humanity. About all the people who had no idea this threat existed. If the swarm had destroyed a civilization this advanced, what chance did humans have? Unless someone warned them. Unless someone brought back the knowledge to fight. Start downloading, Jake said. Everything you can get in the time we have. I'm going to look for anything else useful. While Hammer connected to the ship's systems and began the massive data transfer, Jake explored deeper into the vessel. He found storage rooms filled with equipment he didn't understand. Medical bays with alien instruments. What looked like a laboratory still set up like the researchers had just stepped out for a break. In one room, Jake found something that made him stop cold. Bodies. Not decomposed but perfectly preserved in some kind of stasis field. 6 of them arranged carefully on platforms. The aliens were tall and slender, with 4 arms and skin that shimmered with faint patterns even in death. Their faces were peaceful. They'd known the end was coming. I'm sorry, Jake whispered to them. I'm sorry nobody came in time. He found personal belongings scattered throughout the ship. Something that might have been a musical instrument. Artwork on the wall showing landscapes that no longer existed. A small carved figure in one room, probably a child's toy. These weren't just scientists on a mission. They were families. People with lives and dreams and futures that got cut short. The anger started building in Jake's chest. Anger at the swarm for destroying something so beautiful. Anger at the universe for being cruel enough to let it happen. But mostly anger at himself for even thinking about running. These people had died trying to warn others. The least he could do was make sure their message got delivered. Hammer, change of plans, Jake said, heading back to the control room. Download everything. Every last bit of data in this ship. Jake, I told you. I know what you told me. Download it all anyway. We didn't come this far to do a half measure. Our survival probability drops to 11% if we stay that long. Then we better make sure that 11% counts. Jake started checking his equipment, taking inventory of what they had. His plasma cutter. Hammer's weapons systems. Some explosive charges he used for breaking apart larger salvage. Not much to fight off an ancient alien menace with, but it would have to do. Hammer didn't argue anymore. He just started the full download, his systems humming with effort as terabytes of alien data flowed into his storage banks. Jake spent the next few hours preparing. He sealed every entrance to the ship except one, the hatch they'd come through. That would be their choke point if something got inside. He rigged up some of the alien equipment he'd found, hoping it might work as barricades or deterrents. He had no idea if any of it would help, but doing something felt better than just waiting. Around hour 5, Hammer sensors showed the first real movement. The machines outside were assembling themselves, pieces crawling across the ground to connect with other pieces. Dead technology becoming alive again, or at least animated. The swarm was building itself an army from the graveyard itself. Jake, they're using the wrecked machines as raw materials, salvaging parts and reconfiguring them. It's actually quite fascinating from a technical standpoint. Save the science lesson for later, Hammer. How's the download? 40% complete. Jake watched through the ship's external cameras as the graveyard transformed. Machines he'd walked past 100 times were standing up, moving with jerky, unnatural motions. They weren't operating like they'd been designed to. The swarm was puppeting them, using them like tools. At hour 7, the first scout forms reached the ship. They were small things about the size of dogs, built from spare parts and scrap metal. They scuttled around the hull, probing, testing, trying to find a way inside. Hammer's weapons tracked them through the walls. Not yet, Jake said. Let's not announce ourselves until we have to. The scouts eventually left, but Jake knew they'd be back. And they wouldn't be alone. Hour 9. 60% downloaded. The sky outside was getting dark, the orange sun setting behind the mountains of dead machines. Jake checked his oxygen supply, his water, his ammunition. Everything was running low. He'd planned for a 3-day salvage run, not a last stand against an alien intelligence. He sat down next to Hammer, watching the progress bar creep forward. You know, I always thought I'd die in some stupid accident. Fall off a building or get hit by a transport. Never thought it would be in an alien spaceship fighting off a machine plague. We're not dead yet, Hammer pointed out. Yeah, but that 11% is looking pretty optimistic right now. Jake, I want you to know that if we don't make it, working with you has been the most interesting period of my operational existence. Jake laughed despite the situation. Hammer, did you just say something nice to me? I'm simply stating facts. Sure you are, buddy. Sure you are. Hour 11. 75%. The scouts returned, and this time they brought friends. Larger forms, built from the hulks of war machines, surrounded the ship. They weren't attacking yet. They were waiting for something. They're coordinating, Hammer observed. There's an intelligence directing them. The swarm isn't just mindless consumption. It thinks. It plans. Great. That makes me feel so much better. Hour 13. 85%. Jake's motion sensors showed hundreds of forms now, all around them. The ship was completely surrounded. They'd waited too long. Even if they got the data downloaded, they'd never make it back to the shuttle. Unless... Jake pulled up the ship's schematics that Hammer had downloaded earlier. He studied them carefully, looking for something, anything that might help. And then he found it. Deep in the ship's core, below the main reactor. A weapon system. Something the original crew had installed but never got to use. Hammer, can you access the ship's weapons? Scanning. Yes, but Jake, you need to see this. It's not a conventional weapon. It's an electromagnetic pulse generator. Designed specifically to disrupt the swarm's control signals. Will it work? According to the specs, it should shut down every machine in the graveyard. Everything. Including me. Jake looked at his robot partner, his friend. Is there any other way? Not that I can see. Hour 14. 92%. The swarm was getting impatient. Larger forms started battering at the hull, testing the ship's defenses. The ancient metal held, but Jake could hear it groaning under the assault. How much longer? 20 minutes. Maybe less. And the pulse weapon? How long to charge it? 5 minutes once activated. But Jake, once I'm offline, you'll have to get back to the shuttle alone. Through the entire graveyard. With no backup. I'll manage. I always do. 98%. The hull was starting to buckle. Whatever the swarm had built outside was strong enough to tear through even this advanced alloy. Come on, Jake muttered, watching the progress bar. 99%. The hull breached. A massive claw tore through the corridor outside the control room. 100%. I've got it all. Hammer shouted. Every file, every record, everything. Then let's light this candle. Jake's fingers flew across the alien control panel, following Hammer's instructions. The symbols meant nothing to him, but his robot partner was calling out which ones to press, translating in real time as the swarm tore through the ship's outer corridors. Third symbol from the left, then the one that looks like a spiral, Hammer directed. Good. Now press and hold the central crystal. The ship hummed beneath Jake's feet. Deep in its core, ancient systems were waking up after centuries of sleep. The electromagnetic pulse weapon was charging, drawing on reserves of power that had kept the warning signal broadcasting for 1,000 years. Another crash echoed through the ship. Closer this time. Jake could hear metal scraping against metal, the sound of the swarm's machines ripping through bulkheads. They had minutes at best. Hammer, when this pulse goes off, what happens to you exactly? The robot's optical sensors dimmed slightly. Complete system shut down. Every circuit, every processor, everything electronic within the pulse radius will go dark. Including my core functions. But you'll reboot, right? Eventually? Unknown. My systems aren't designed to handle an electromagnetic pulse of this magnitude. There's a 63% chance of permanent damage to my neural network. A 41% chance of total memory loss. A 19% chance I won't restart at all. Jake stopped what he was doing and looked at his partner. 2 years they'd worked together. 2 years of close calls and lucky breaks, and Hammer always having his back. The robot wasn't just equipment anymore. He was family. There's got to be another way, Jake said. We can fight our way out. You've got weapons, I've got charges. We can. Jake, look at the sensors. Jake pulled up the display. His heart sank. There were over 300 swarm constructs surrounding the ship now, with more arriving every minute. They ranged from small scout forms to massive things built from battleship parts. Some were armed with weapons that could level buildings. We'd last maybe 30 seconds in a firefight, Hammer said quietly. This is the only option. I'm not leaving you behind. You're not leaving me behind. You're saving me. The data I'm carrying is worth more than my operational status. It's worth more than both of our lives. You know that. Jake wanted to argue, wanted to find some brilliant solution that saved everyone and everything. But he wasn't that smart, and this wasn't that kind of story. Sometimes the hero didn't get to save everyone. Sometimes you just had to make the hard choice and live with it. Okay, Jake said finally. But I'm dragging your metal butt back to the shuttle even if it takes me a week. Deal? Deal. Now please hurry because we have approximately 90 seconds before they breach this room. Jake finished the activation sequence. The weapon charged faster now, the ship's lights flickering as it drew more and more power. The blue pulse from the central crystal grew brighter, more intense, until Jake had to look away. 60 seconds to full charge, Hammer announced. Jake, there's something I need to tell you. Can it wait? No. I need you to know that I understand why humans do what you do. Taking risks. Making sacrifices. I used to think it was inefficient, illogical. But now I understand. You do it because some things are worth more than survival. Some things are worth dying for. Hammer, you're getting way too philosophical for a robot who's about to take a nap. A potentially permanent nap. Don't even joke about that. The door to the control room exploded inward. A swarm construct squeezed through, something built from the parts of a dozen different machines. It had too many limbs and eyes made from targeting sensors. It scuttled toward them like a mechanical spider. Hammer opened fire immediately. His weapons tore into the construct, but it kept coming. Behind it, Jake could see more waiting in the corridor. The swarm had finally broken through. 30 seconds. Hammer shouted over the weapon's fire. Jake grabbed the small explosive charges from his belt and threw them at the doorway. The blast knocked the lead construct backwards, buying them a few precious seconds. But more were coming. Always more. 20 seconds. Another construct pushed through. Hammer's weapons were overheating now, the barrels glowing red. Jake fired his plasma cutter, the tool never meant for combat but doing its best anyway. They were being overwhelmed, pushed back toward the central crystal. 10 seconds. A massive claw grabbed Hammer's leg, trying to drag him down. The robot kicked free but lost his balance. Jake caught him, holding his partner upright as the swarm closed in from all sides. 5 seconds. Jake could see their eyes now, all those repurposed sensors and cameras, watching with cold machine intelligence. The swarm knew what they were doing. It was trying to stop them, throwing everything it had at the control room. Jake, Hammer said, his voice suddenly calm despite the chaos. It's been an honor. Shut up. You're going to be fine. 3 seconds. Hammer. 2. The constructs were on top of them now, metal hands reaching, weapons charging. Jake closed his eyes and held onto his friend. 1. The world went white. The pulse exploded outward from the ship's core like a shockwave made of pure energy. It swept through the vessel in an instant, then burst out into the graveyard beyond. Every machine, every circuit, every electronic system within 10 miles shut down simultaneously. The swarm constructs froze mid-attack, their connection severed. Then they collapsed, falling apart into their component pieces. The intelligence that had been directing them was gone, scattered like smoke in the wind. The silence was deafening. Jake opened his eyes slowly. His helmet's display was dead. His wrist computer was dark. Every piece of technology he carried had been fried. But he was alive. His heart was beating, his lungs were breathing. The pulse had worked. Then he looked down at Hammer. The robot lay motionless on the floor, optical sensors dark, systems completely offline. Jake dropped to his knees beside his partner, checking for any sign of activity. Nothing. No lights, no sounds, no movement. Hammer? Come on, buddy, wake up. Jake shook the robot's shoulder, knowing it was useless but unable to stop himself. Hammer. Nothing. Jake sat there for a long moment, surrounded by the wreckage of the swarm's attack, holding his friend's lifeless hand. All around the ship, the graveyard was silent again. Dead machines lay where they'd fallen, motionless. The swarm was beaten, at least for now. But the victory felt hollow. Jake forced himself to stand. He couldn't stay here. The pulse had worked on the swarm, but there was no guarantee it would stay down forever. He needed to get back to the shuttle, get off this planet, and get the data to people who could use it. But first he had a promise to keep. Hammer weighed about 400 pounds of dense metal and advanced machinery. Jake weighed 170 on a good day. The physics were not in his favor. But he'd promised, and Jake Foster didn't break his promises. He grabbed Hammer under the arms and started dragging. The first 100 feet took 20 minutes and left Jake gasping for air. His muscles screamed at him to stop, to rest, to give up. He ignored them and kept pulling. The graveyard outside the ship was a maze of fallen swarm constructs and the original dead machines. Jake had to navigate carefully, dragging Hammer around obstacles, sometimes having to backtrack when a path was blocked. His oxygen supply was running low. His water was gone. His body was at its limit. He kept going. Night fell and Jake worked by the light of the stars. Dawn came and he was still dragging. His hands were bleeding inside his gloves. His back felt like it was going to snap. Every breath was painful. He kept going. On the second day, Jake fell and couldn't get back up. He lay there next to Hammer, staring at the orange sky, thinking maybe this was it. Maybe he'd pushed too far. His body had finally hit a wall it couldn't climb over. Then he thought about the data. About the warning. About everyone back home who had no idea what was coming. He thought about the aliens who died in that ship, leaving their message for someone to find. He thought about Hammer, trusting him to finish what they'd started. Jake got up. On the third day he saw the shuttle. It was still there, right where he'd left it, about a quarter-mile away. The closest quarter-mile of his life. He made it in 4 hours. Jake collapsed inside the shuttle, dragging Hammer in behind him. The ship's systems were older, more shielded than modern tech. They'd survived the pulse. With shaking hands, Jake fired up the engines and lifted off, leaving the graveyard behind. Only when they were in orbit, with the autopilot set for Earth, did Jake finally let himself rest. He sat next to Hammer's motionless form, too tired to even take off his helmet. "We did it, buddy," Jake whispered. "We got the message. Now let's get it home." Then darkness took him and Jake Foster knew nothing more. Jake woke up to the soft beeping of the shuttle's medical scanner. His whole body felt like it had been run over by a cargo hauler. Twice. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, every muscle protesting at once. "Easy there, hero," a voice said. Jake's vision cleared enough to see a medic leaning over him. Human. Female. Wearing the uniform of Earth's Deep Space Rescue Corps. Behind her, through the shuttle's window, Jake could see a massive station floating in space. They weren't in orbit around the graveyard planet anymore. "Where am I?" Jake croaked, his throat dry as sand. "Waypoint Station 7. Your shuttle's emergency beacon activated 3 days ago. We picked you up drifting in neutral space, half dead from dehydration and exhaustion." The medic scanned him with a handheld device. "What the hell were you doing out there?" Jake's heart jumped. "Hammer. Where's Hammer?" "Your robot?" "He's in the cargo bay. Completely fried, I'm afraid." Whatever hit him scrambled every circuit in his body. She paused. "What happened?" "I need to see him. Right now." "You need to rest. You've been unconscious for..." Jake was already pulling himself off the medical bed, ignoring the pain, ignoring the medic's protests. He stumbled through the shuttle on legs that barely worked, making his way to the small cargo area where they'd placed Hammer. His partner lay on a maintenance table, still and dark. Someone had cleaned the dust and grime off his metal frame. In the station's bright lights, Hammer looked almost peaceful, like he was just sleeping. "Come on, buddy," Jake said, placing his hand on Hammer's chest plate. "Time to wake up. We made it. We're safe." Nothing. Jake tried accessing Hammer's emergency reboot systems, but everything was dead. The electromagnetic pulse had done its job too well. Every system, every backup, every redundancy had been shut down. A tech specialist approached, a young guy with grease stains on his uniform. "I've been looking at your robot, sir. The damage is pretty extensive. I might be able to get some basic functions back online, but his memory core..." The tech shook his head. "It's been wiped clean. Even if we restart him, he won't remember anything." "No." Jake's voice was firm. "There's data in there. Critical data. You can't wipe it." "I'm not wiping it, sir. The pulse already did. His neural network is scrambled beyond recognition." Jake felt panic rising in his chest. They'd gone through all that, sacrificed everything, and for what? If the data was gone, if Hammer's memory was destroyed, then those aliens died for nothing. Their warning would never be heard. "Wait," Jake said, an idea forming. "Hammer didn't just store the data in his neural network. He's got backup drives. Physical storage. Military-grade stuff designed to survive anything." The tech's eyes lit up. "You're right. Let me check." It took 2 hours of careful disassembly, but they found it. Deep in Hammer's chest cavity, protected by layers of shielding, was a backup storage unit. The tech pulled it out carefully like he was handling a bomb. "It's intact," the tech breathed. "Completely intact. Whatever that pulse was, it didn't reach this deep." Jake felt relief wash over him so strong he had to sit down. "Can you read it?" "Give me a few minutes." Those few minutes felt like hours. Jake sat next to Hammer's disassembled form, holding his partner's metal hand, waiting. The medic brought him water and food, which he forced down without tasting. Finally, the tech looked up, his face pale. "Sir, you need to talk to the station commander. Right now." Within an hour, Jake was in a secured briefing room facing 3 high-ranking military officers and 2 scientists. They'd hooked the storage drive up to an isolated computer system and were reviewing the data. Jake watched their faces change as they read through the files. "Disbelief. Fear." "This is real?" one of the officers asked. "This swarm thing, it actually exists?" "I saw it," Jake said. "It took over the entire graveyard. Thousands of dead machines all moving like puppets. If we hadn't stopped it, it would have spread." One of the scientists, an older woman with gray hair, was reading through the technical data. "This is incredible. This civilization was thousands of years ahead of us and they still couldn't stop it. They could only run. They also figured out how to hurt it," Jake pointed out. "It's all in those files. Weapons research, defense strategies, everything they learned." The station commander, a stern man with a face like carved stone, leaned forward. "Mr. Foster, do you understand what you've brought us? This isn't just information. This is a declaration of war against an enemy we didn't know existed. I understand that if we don't prepare, we'll end up like them. Dead and forgotten, leaving a warning nobody will hear." The briefing lasted 6 hours. Jake told them everything: finding the ship, translating the message, the swarm waking up, the desperate escape. They questioned every detail, made him repeat parts, showed him images and asked if that's what he'd seen. By the end they believed him. "We're sending this data to Earth immediately," the commander said. "Every military installation, every research facility, every colony world. Within a week, the entire human sphere will know about the swarm." "What about the other species?" Jake asked. "The aliens we trade with, the ones we share space with. They need to know too. We'll contact the Galactic Council. This affects everyone." Jake nodded, feeling the weight finally lifting off his shoulders. The message was delivered. The warning was heard. Whatever happened next, at least humanity would face it with their eyes open. "What about Hammer?" Jake asked quietly. "Can he be fixed?" The tech specialist had followed them to the briefing. "We can rebuild his body, restore his basic functions. But his personality, his memories, everything that made him who he was, that's gone. We'd essentially be building a new robot in his shell." Jake looked at his hands, still bandaged from dragging Hammer across the graveyard. "Do it anyway. He deserves a second chance, even if he doesn't remember the first one." Over the next few weeks, while humanity mobilized and scientists studied the alien data, Jake stayed at the station watching Hammer's reconstruction. New circuits replaced fried ones. New processors took the place of damaged ones. Slowly, piece by piece, his partner was rebuilt. The day they activated him, Jake was there. Hammer's optical sensors flickered to life, running through startup diagnostics. His head turned, focusing on Jake. "Hello," Hammer said. His voice was the same, but there was no recognition in it. "I am Military Combat Unit Hammer 9. Are you my operator?" Jake smiled sadly. Yeah, I am. Name's Jake Foster. We're partners." "Partners?" Hammer repeated, processing the word. "I have no memory of previous operations. My neural network appears to have been reset." "That's okay. We'll make new memories." Jake stood, extending his hand. "How do you feel about salvage work?" "I have no frame of reference for that occupation. But I am programmed to assist my operator in whatever capacity required." "Good enough for me. Come on, Hammer. Let me tell you a story about what we did together." As they walked through the station, Jake told Hammer everything. About the graveyard, about the ship, about the swarm and the sacrifice the robot had made. Hammer listened with mechanical attention, processing each detail. "That was a logical decision," Hammer said when Jake finished. "Sacrificing one unit to preserve critical data that could save billions. It was more than logical," Jake said. "It was brave. I do not understand bravery." "You will. Give it time." 6 months later, the first defensive stations went online around human colony worlds, built using technology from the ancient archive. Scientists were developing weapons specifically designed to fight the swarm. The Galactic Council had formed a coalition, uniting dozens of species in preparation for a threat they all now understood. And in a small workshop on Earth, Jake Foster and Hammer 9 worked on their new project. Not salvaging this time, but building. They were constructing detection satellites, devices that could sense swarm activity before it became a threat. Jake designed them based on human ingenuity, and Hammer built them with precision learned from alien knowledge. They made a good team. Again. One day, while calibrating a sensor array, Hammer paused in his work. "Jake, I have been analyzing the decisions made during our mission to the graveyard." "Yeah. What about them?" "The probability of success was extremely low. The logical choice would have been to flee with partial data. Yet we stayed. We risked everything for complete information." Hammer's head tilted slightly. "Why?" Jake thought about it for a moment. "Because some things are worth the risk. Because running away meant those people died for nothing. And because leaving you behind wasn't an option. Even though I have no memory of being that version of myself?" "You're still you, Hammer. The memories might be gone, but the important stuff is still there. Trust me." Hammer went back to work, but Jake could tell the robot was still thinking. That was good. Thinking meant growing. Growing meant becoming more than just a machine. 30 years passed. The swarm finally emerged from deep space, a wave of consuming intelligence that swept toward inhabited systems. But instead of unprepared civilizations fleeing in terror, it found a galaxy ready to fight. Humanity led the defense, armed with weapons and knowledge from a civilization long dead. The battles were fierce, the losses heavy, but slowly, system by system, the swarm was pushed back. Not destroyed, it was too vast, too distributed for that, but contained, controlled, kept away from the worlds where people lived and dreamed. And on Earth, now an old man with gray hair and tired eyes, Jake Foster watched the news reports with Hammer 9 standing beside him. The robot had stayed with him all these years, through battles and peace, through triumphs and losses. "We did it," Jake said quietly. "That message we carried home, it saved everyone." "We did it together," Hammer corrected. "Even the version of me that I cannot remember." Jake smiled. "He'd be proud of who you became." "I hope so. Though I still do not fully understand this concept of pride." "That's okay, buddy. Some things you don't need to understand. You just need to feel them." They stood together in comfortable silence, man and machine, watching humanity's ships patrol the borders of known space. The warning that had pulsed in darkness for 1,000 years had finally found its audience. And that audience had refused to let history repeat itself. The message had been delivered. The bearer had survived. And the galaxy would remember.